So we've made some good progress. We can log in now and we're getting a JWT token, which isn't in quite the correct format, but we'll get to that momentarily. There was an oversight on my part. And we can log out and everything seems to be working properly. And this, the Manage Catalog page, should be a protected root, but really, if I log out and just put /admin there, I still see it. So we still have some work to do. And part of what we have to do is to actually do something with that token. So let's get started. I'm going to go to my backend source code. And the first thing I'm going to do is fix a mistake in the tokens.go file. And it was just a little oversight on my part. The very last line at the end of the function, I have app_write_json, and I neglected to cast this, which is a slice of bytes, JWT bytes. It needs to be a string. So I need to cast that to a string. So I'm going to stop my application, start my application, and go back to my web browser and log in, and it should still work, but now I should have a valid token, something that's in the correct format. So I'll go to the login screen and log in as me@here.com with the password, and that looks better. That's actually the correct format. Okay, so now we need to actually do something with the token. So if you recall, when we log in, we actually get this token and we lift state and put it at the top level of our application, the app.js component, and there I can push it anywhere I need. So what are we going to do with that? Well, part of what we have to do, of course, is to add that token to our requests that we send to our protected routes on the back end and authenticate using that token. So in order to make that happen, the authenticate part, we need to go back to our back-end code and open our middleware, and we need to write some new middleware. Okay? So I'm going to call this middleware. It'll be a function with the correct receiver. And I'm just going to call it check token. And because it's a middleware, we have to have next http.handler. And it needs to return an http.handler. And inside of that, just like we do in the one above, I'll just copy this entire section and modify it to save some typing. We have a return function, and this part is going to go away. And what we're going to do here is, first of all, add a header, checking for authorization. So w.header.add, and we're adding a header called vary, or a varying header, and it's going to be authorization. So the key is vary and the value is authorization. And now we'll grab the header that we're getting called authorization, and we'll store that in a variable I'll call authHeader. And that is r.header.get, and we're going to get authorization. A header that we're going to have to send from our front end. And then we'll just do a check here. If authHeader is equal exactly to nothing, at this point, if you wanted to, you could set an anonymous user. So I'll just put could set an anonymous user. And we're not going to do that, but there may be situations where you want certain protected routes to be available to anonymous users. And if so, this is where you would perform that logic. Now we're going to take that authHeader variable and split it on spaces. Okay, so we're to declare a variable called headerParts. And that will be equal to, from the strings package, we're going to call split, and we're splitting authHeader, and we're splitting it on a space, which will be in the value of the header that we set in the front end, and we'll get to that in a while. And we're going to expect there's exactly 2 parts in that split in headerParts. So we'll say if len headerParts is not equal to 2, then we'll just throw an error, app.errorJSON, and we'll pass the response writer and a new error, errors.new, and we'll just say invalid auth header, and return. So that's the first thing we're checking. Next, we'll see if the first part of headerParts is not equal to what we expect it to be. We'll throw another error. So I'll say if header parts, and the first index of the array from that split is not equal to bearer, which is what we're going to set in that header in our front end, then we'll throw that error again. So I'll just copy this and change the error message to unauthorized, no bearer. And you can make that whatever you want. Okay. Next, we'll look for the token itself, which was included in the header that we're going to receive. So we'll declare a variable called token, and that will be assigned the value of header parts, and it's the second index in the array. Now we begin checking that token, and we have a lot of checks to make. So first of all, we'll declare a variable claims and potentially an error, and those will be assigned the value of, from the JWT package, we're going to call hmaccheck. And that expects a couple of parameters. First one is a slice of bytes, so we'll convert our token to a slice of bytes. And bytes is not plural, so let's get rid of the S there. And the second thing we want is our secret. And we get that again. We want to convert it to a slice of bytes, and it's going to come from app.config.jwt.secret. Okay, so this is our HMAC check. And again, we're going to check for an error. So we'll say, if error is not equal to nil, then I want to return some errors here. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in here and change that to unauthorized, failed, and I'll just call it HMAC check. You can make whatever error message you want there. So that's the first thing we're going to check against the token. The next thing is we want to make sure, is the token still valid? So we'll say, if not, claims.valid time.now. So is this token still valid at this moment in time? And if it's not, then we want to return an error. So in here, again, I'll copy this error code and paste it in there and change the message to token expired. And next, we want to make sure that whoever issued this is in fact our application, that we're not getting a token from some other application. So we'll say if not claims.accept audience, and the audience we're looking for in my case is mydomain.com, and you might be using a different one, but just put whatever is appropriate for that. And again, I'll paste in that error code and say invalid audience. And now we want to check the issuer. If claims.issuer is not equal to mydomain.com, then again another error. Invalid issuer. Now if we pass all of these checks, and again let's go through them again. So we're getting our token, and we're getting that from header parts, which came from what was passed in the authorization token, and it's the second index in the string. First of all, we make sure that the claim is valid by doing an HMAC check. So if it's not passing that check, then there's something wrong with this token, and we're just going to return an error. Then we make sure that it's still valid, that the token hasn't expired, and we do that here from line 49 to 52. Next, we want to make sure that the audience for what we're going to send is accepted, that we're actually allowed to or permitted to send this kind of information, whatever's behind this token, whatever this token is protecting, to the appropriate audience. And we make sure that the token was in fact issued for our domain. And if all of those things work, then we can actually do what is necessary. So what I'm going to do is extract the user ID that was embedded into that token. User ID and potentially an error are assigned the value of, and we want to convert it from what it is into an int. So strconv.parseInt claims.subject, and we want it to be a 64-bit one. So we have that, and we check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, and I'll paste in my error code and adjust it and just say unauthorized. I don't really know what to put here for an error message, and this will suffice for the moment. And just to make sure we have this, I'm going to print this to the screen, to the console. Log.println valid user, and then user ID. Okay. Otherwise, I won't be able to compile this because I have to do something with this code. So that is our middleware. And let's just run our application to make sure everything compiles properly. And I have an error on middleware.go line 22. Right there, we should have a comma or a closing parentheses like that, and get rid of this one. And get rid of the extra HTTP. I don't know where that came from. That looks better. Now we have a different error. Down here, this should be a parentheses, not a square bracket. I'm on my first coffee. Please forgive me. All right, now we should be able to compile this and run it. Good, it's running. Okay. So we've got the middleware, and now we actually need to use this middleware. So if we go back to our roots file, this is where we use middleware. Right now, we have one piece of middleware, enable cores. And we're going to have to make a change to that cores middleware in a moment so we can actually pass the necessary information. But first of all, let's set this up so we can actually use more than one piece of middleware. Because we want to use the cores middleware on everything, but we want to use the check token middleware only on some roots. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's a number of ways of doing it. The simplest way, far and away, in my opinion, is to install another package that allows us to chain middleware. And it's a very popular package, used in a lot of places. So open your terminal window, and let's go get it. And we're going to type go get, and the package we want is from github.com, and it's from the user JUSTINAS, Alice. That's what I want, and that allows me to chain some middleware. And you can go to that URL, github.com, Justinus Alice, and read all the documentation. It's very short because it's a very simple package. So that's installed. It's now available to us, and now I want to use it. And in order to do that, in order to chain things the way that we want, we actually have to write another helper function here because we're using HTTP router. So it's a very simple thing. I'm going to write a function. It has the receiver app, pointer to application. And I'm going to call it wrap. It allows us to wrap our middleware. And it's going to take one parameter, which I'll call next. And it's an http.handler. And it returns an http router.handle. And inside of that, we have a return a function. We're going to return a function, which takes http.responseWriter, and it takes a pointer to a request, r, http.request, and it takes ps, which those are the parameters, the params from HTTP router, http router.params. Now the first thing we're going to do is declare a variable called context, CTX we'll call it, and it's assigned the value of context with value, and it takes as its arguments r.context, the context from our request, and we're looking for params, and we pass it ps. Now we have the necessary CTX. We've added the things from our context into what we're returning. Otherwise, we won't be able to use any parameters in our HTTP router package. And then we just say next.serve HTTP, hand it our response writer, and hand it r.withContext, and give it the variable we just created, CTX. So we're just adding what's necessary from the context back to our new HTTP router.handle. Okay, so that's our wrapper function. And that means we now have a means of using more than one bit of middleware in our roots. So to do that, we go down to our roots function, and we declare a new variable. Actually, I'll do it after the HTTP router now. We say secure, that's what I'm going to call my chain, is equal to Alice, the package we just installed, new, and we hand it app.checkToken. Now I can put as many pieces of middleware into this variable secure because this is actually a chain of middleware. So to use that, I'm going to come down and I'm going to protect one root. And the one root I'm going to protect right now is this one. And to do it, I could fight with this syntax, or I could use a different syntax that's available to us in the HTTP router package, which does exactly the same thing, but makes using this particular secure chain much, much simpler. So I'm going to comment that one out, and I'll create a new root right here. And it's going to be router again, but this time I'll call post, like this. The same functionality, just a different syntax. And the root I want to protect, or that I want to match here, is v1/v1/admin/edit movie. What happens when someone fills out that form to add or modify a movie? And here, this is where I'm going to use the wrap function we just created. app.wrap, right there, try that again, wrap. And I want to wrap secure, the middleware chain that I just declared above, then func, then I'm going to call a function, and the function I want to call is the same one I did before, app.editMovie. Okay. Now with this change to our roots file, now I can add this little bit, app.wrapSecure, to anything I want to protect the backend root, to require authorization in the form of a JSON web token. So that part's done. Now let's go back to our middleware. We want to make one more change in our middleware at the very top here. We need to modify our headers a little bit so we actually allow certain kinds of things to be passed. And one of the things that we're definitely going to want is an authorization header, and we may as well at the same time set our content type header to be something that's permitted. So this is as simple as adding one line right here. w.header.set, and I'm going to set the key to be access-control-allow-headers. Exactly like that. Upper and lowercase matching exactly what I've just typed. And what we're going to accept are content-type, then a comma with no space, and authorization. And make sure you spell that right or it's not going to work for you. And that's it. So now, when I stop my application, it's already stopped, let's run it and make sure that everything compiles. And it does. So now we have middleware. We have a means of applying that middleware selectively to certain roots in our application, and we're setting the proper headers that allow us to accept an authorization header and a content type header, which we didn't have, and everything still worked. But it's proper practice and a good idea to actually accept and send the correct content type header. So, in the next lecture, we'll start working on the front end and actually see if this authorization token we received does its job.